I was living on my fingers long before I admitted I was lonely. Dominic Hale still slept beside me every night, his arms sometimes draped across my waist out of habit, but the warmth in his touch had thinned into something mechanical. We had been together for 5 years, long enough to memorize each other's coffee orders, long enough to share a lease and a dog-eared collection of inside jokes, long enough to convince our friends we were solid. From the outside, we were stable. Inside our apartment, I felt like a decorative object he had once cherished and slowly stopped seeing that in the beginning, Dominic had been magnetic. He used to kiss me mid-sentence, laugh against my mouth, and promise that I was the best decision he had ever made. I believed him because he looked at me like I was rare. Over time, that look shifted. His gaze began sliding past me toward his phone, his laptop, his next promotion. His ambition wasn't cruel, but it was consuming. He spoke about quarterly targets with more passion than he spoke about us that I tried to keep up. I planned date nights. I suggested weekend trips. I bought new shirts, hoping he might notice the effort stitched into the fabric. He would smile distractedly, say I looked nice, and then return to whatever demanded his attention. Each small dismissal collected in my chest like dust, and eventually I stopped shaking it off. Physical intimacy faded first. We still shared a bed, but the space between us widened, invisible yet undeniable. When I reached for him, he was tired. When I initiated, he was stressed. When I asked if everything was okay, he told me I was overthinking again. That word, again, made me feel unreasonable, like my need for affection was an inconvenience. So I learned to quiet myself. I learned to satisfy my body alone, in the dim light of our bathroom, while Dominic answered emails in the next room. It was easier than asking to be wanted. It was safer than hearing no. Living on my fingers became less about pleasure and more about control. At least there, I didn't have to compete with deadlines. The real ache, though, wasn't physical. It was the silence that followed dinner, when Dominic would scroll through market reports and I would scroll through strangers' lives. Couples laughing on vacation. Men surprising their partners with flowers. It wasn't that I envied the gestures, I envied the attention. I wanted to be chosen without having to beg for it. That I tried to talk to him one night, my voice careful and measured. I told Dominic I felt distant from him. He sighed, not angrily, but with fatigue. He said relationships matured and that passion naturally cooled. He said stability mattered more than sparks. Then he kissed my forehead like I was fragile and went back to his laptop. The conversation ended before it began. That was the night I realized I felt lonelier in my relationship than I ever had while single. The message from Everett Sloan arrived on a Tuesday evening when Dominic was working late. I had posted a photo earlier that day, nothing provocative, just me in a gray sweater, trying to look less tired than I felt. Everett's message was simple: you have kind eyes. They look like they're carrying something heavy. I almost ignored it. Compliments from strangers can feel shallow, rehearsed. But something about the specificity unsettled me. He hadn't commented on my body or my smile, he had noticed my eyes. I replied with a polite thank you, expecting the conversation to fade. That it didn't. Everett asked what I did for work. He asked what I liked to read. He asked if I preferred rain or sunlight. His questions were deliberate, unhurried. When I answered, he responded thoughtfully, sharing small fragments about himself without oversharing. He worked in graphic design. He loved old bookstores. He believed in long walks when he needed clarity. That I found myself typing more than I intended. I told him I liked rain because it felt honest. I told him I used to paint before life became practical. I didn't mention Dominic at first, not because I was hiding him, but because he felt irrelevant to the version of me Everett was discovering. When Dominic came home that night, I was still smiling at my phone. He noticed. Good news? He asked, loosening his tie. Just talking to someone. I said lightly. That he nodded without curiosity and disappeared into the shower. That indifference should have reassured me. Instead, it left space, dangerous, open space where attention could grow. Over the next week, Everett and I spoke daily. Our conversations slipped easily from surface topics into personal confessions. He told me about a past relationship that ended because he felt unseen. The word struck me like a mirror. I admitted, cautiously, that I understood that feeling more than I wished I did. You deserve someone who looks at you like you matter, Everett wrote one night that I stared at the sentence longer than necessary. Dominic was asleep beside me, one arm flung across the mattress, his breathing steady and oblivious. I wondered when he had last looked at me with intention. Everett never crossed obvious lines. He didn't ask for explicit photos or late-night secrets that felt transactional. Instead, he remembered details. When I mentioned I had a stressful meeting, he checked in afterward. When I said I missed painting, he sent me a photo of a mural he admired and told me he hoped I would create something again. Dominic, meanwhile, forgot our anniversary until I reminded him. He apologized, ordered takeout, and promised to make it up to me. We ate in front of the television. I told myself it was enough. The first time Everett's words unsettled me was during a conversation about touch. We were discussing how different people expressed affection, and he said, if someone isn't touching your soul, they don't deserve your body. My chest tightened. It felt too precise, too aligned with the quiet hunger I had been carrying that I typed and erased 3 different responses before settling on something safe. He replied with patience, as if he could sense my restraint. Are you happy? He asked finally. The question hovered between us, heavier than anything before it. No one had asked me that directly in a long time. Dominic assumed happiness was implied in longevity. Everett demanded honesty. That I looked at Dominic sleeping, his face softened by dreams I wasn't part of. I remembered the way he used to hold me, the way he used to choose me without hesitation. I wondered if I had imagined that intensity or if we had simply misplaced it. My fingers hovered over the screen. I don't know, I admitted. I wish someone would choose me the way they used to. The message sent before I could reconsider. Everett's reply came quickly. Then maybe it's time you let yourself be chosen. I set my phone down, my pulse louder than the quiet room. Nothing physical had happened. No promises had been made. Yet something irreversible had shifted inside me. For the first time in years, I felt seen, and that recognition felt more intimate than any touch Dominic and I had shared in months. As I lay in the dark, inches from the man I had built a life with, I realized the danger wasn't Everett's attention. It was how desperately I wanted it. After I told Everett Sloan I wished someone would choose me, our conversation stopped feeling accidental. He began sending voice notes in the evenings, his tone calm and unhurried, as if he had nowhere else to be. Hearing him say my name, Julian, felt disarming in a way text never could. He pronounced it carefully, like it mattered. I started timing my replies so Dominic Hale wouldn't overhear the softness in my voice. Dominic noticed the change in me before he noticed the cause. I smiled at my phone more often. I seemed lighter, distracted in a way that didn't revolve around him. One night during dinner, he set his fork down and asked, "You've been different lately. Something going on?" The question should have been an opening. Instead, it felt like an interrogation. "I've just been thinking," I said, which was true but incomplete. Dominic nodded, accepting the partial answer because probing further would require emotional labor he no longer volunteered. He returned to discussing a new client, unaware that every dismissive pivot pushed me further from him. Everett suggested we meet after 2 weeks of daily conversation. Coffee, he wrote. Public. No expectations. I stared at the message for a long time. Meeting would convert abstraction into reality. As long as Everett existed behind a screen, I could pretend this was harmless, a friendship, a distraction, a temporary bomb. In person, it would become a choice. I told Dominic I had plans with an old friend from college. The lie slid out smoother than I expected, which unsettled me more than the deception itself. Dominic barely looked up from his laptop when he said, "Have fun." The cafe Everett chose was small and softly lit, tucked between a bookstore and a tailor shop. When I walked in, he was already there, standing as soon as he recognized me. He was taller than I imagined, dressed simply, his expression open and steady. There was no smugness in his smile, no triumph at seeing me arrive. "Hi, Julian," he said, like we were continuing a conversation paused only moments ago. Sitting across from him felt strangely natural. We spoke about neutral things at first, the weather, the neighborhood, but beneath every sentence ran the awareness of what this meeting represented. Everett listened with the same attentiveness he showed online. He didn't interrupt. He didn't check his phone. When I laughed, he held my gaze as if the sound pleased him. At one point, he asked gently, "Are you okay being here?" The question exposed my internal fracture. I nodded, though my pulse contradicted the gesture. Being there felt both wrong and necessary. Wrong because I had not ended things with Dominic. Necessary because I needed to know whether the connection I felt was real or simply the product of loneliness that we didn't touch. When we left the cafe, we stood on the sidewalk longer than required, neither of us eager to end the moment. Everett didn't lean in or test boundaries. He simply said, "I'm glad you came," and waited for me to decide what happened next. That I went home to Dominic feeling altered. The apartment looked the same, but I moved through it differently, aware of how much of myself I had been withholding. Dominic was watching television when I entered. He muted it and asked, "Good night?" "It was," I said, and realized I meant it. Over the next week, the contrast between them sharpened. Everett asked about my childhood, my abandoned paintings, my fears about growing older unnoticed. Dominic complained about deadlines and fell asleep mid-conversation. I tried once more to bridge the distance between us. I suggested we take a weekend trip, just the two of us, somewhere without Wi-Fi. Dominic frowned as if I had proposed recklessness. "Now's not a good time," he said. "Work's intense. You know that." "I always know that," I replied before I could stop myself. That he looked at me then, properly, perhaps sensing the edge in my voice. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I miss you," I said. The confession felt raw, unpolished. "I'm right here," he insisted, gesturing vaguely to the room, to the life we shared. Like evidence in his defense, but proximity wasn't presence. I felt the difference in my bones. Everett asked to see me again. This time I didn't hesitate as long. We met in a park just before dusk, the air cool and restless. We walked side by side, our shoulders occasionally brushing. The contact was accidental, yet charged. He told me he didn't want to complicate my life, but he also refused to pretend his feelings were neutral. "I think about you more than I should," Everett admitted, stopping near a bench. "And I need to know if I'm the only one." Honesty would cost me something either way. I could deny it and retreat to safety, or I could admit the truth and accept the consequences. "You're not," I said quietly. The space between us shifted. Everett reached up slowly, giving me time to move away. His fingers hovered near my jaw before settling there, warm and certain. The gesture was intimate without being aggressive. It felt like permission rather than possession. That I could have stepped back. I didn't. When he kissed me, it wasn't urgent or reckless. It was deliberate, almost reverent, as if he understood the weight of the moment. My hands trembled, not from fear of him, but from awareness of the line I had just crossed. This wasn't loneliness anymore. It was infidelity. That I pulled away first, breath uneven. "This changes everything," I whispered. "It already changed," Everett replied softly. "We're just acknowledging it now." Guilt arrived on schedule, heavy and unignorable. On the walk home, I rehearsed explanations I might never say aloud. By the time I reached the apartment, my resolve had fractured into confusion. Dominic was in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone with a frown. That he looked up as I entered. His expression was different, sharper, alert. "Who's Everett?" he asked. The name landed between us like shattered glass. My stomach dropped. Dominic turned his phone toward me, my messages illuminated on the screen. I had forgotten to log out of my account on the tablet we shared. The oversight felt almost symbolic. Some part of me had stopped trying to conceal the truth. "You went through my messages?" I asked, though the question was deflection. "They were right there," Dominic snapped. "How long has this been going on?" I could lie. I could minimize. Instead, exhaustion overtook me. "Long enough for me to realize how unhappy I've been," I said. His anger flared. "So you cheat?" "I reached for someone who saw me," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "You stopped looking." That's not fair, Dominic insisted, hurt bleeding into his tone. I've worked hard for us. I know, I said, and I meant it. But somewhere along the way, I became an afterthought. Silence expanded, thick and suffocating. Dominic's expression shifted from rage to something more fragile, fear, perhaps, or recognition. For the first time in months, he looked fully present. Are you leaving? He asked. The question was the one I had avoided asking myself. I thought of Everett's steady gaze, of the way he listened. I thought of the years Dominic and I had built, the comfort and the history. I thought of the version of myself who had slowly disappeared. I don't know, I answered honestly. Dominic looked away, as if the uncertainty wounded him more than a definitive goodbye would have. That night we slept on opposite sides of the bed, the distance no longer invisible. My phone buzzed once on the nightstand, Everett, no doubt, but I didn't reach for it. I stared at the ceiling, aware that whatever happened next would demand courage I wasn't sure I possessed. For the first time, the choice wasn't about being chosen, that it was about deciding who I was brave enough to become.